What if everything you believed about success, intelligence, and power was a lie? What if the world isn't run by the smartest people, but by the ones willing to do what others won't? What if obedience, not brilliance, is the true curse of genius? This isn't just a conspiracy theory or a motivational twist. This is a brutal revelation that Machiavelli hinted at centuries ago, but hardly anyone dares to say it out loud today. The real world is not a meritocracy. It's a theater where the actors who play the part best rise, while the true thinkers, the deep minds, the geniuses, they sit backstage, obeying, analyzing, waiting for a logic that never comes.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Machiavelli didn't write The Prince to comfort us. He wrote it to disturb us, to wake us up. He observed the world with a clear, ruthless lens. And what he saw was this: power doesn't belong to the wise, it belongs to the bold. He saw that intelligence, on its own, is often paralyzed by reflection. The smarter you are, the more you second guess. The more you consider consequences, ethics, long-term impacts. But the people who rise, often they don't care. They act. They seize, they manipulate, they lie. And in doing so, they shape the world while the geniuses are still debating. Now ask yourself, how many times have you held back an idea because you weren't sure it was perfect? How many times have you let someone else take the spotlight because you didn't want to seem arrogant? How often have you watched someone less qualified, less thoughtful, less capable rise above you because they were louder, more aggressive, more willing to play the game? This is not weakness on your part. It's the tragedy of genius. The deeper your mind goes, the more you hesitate on the surface. And in a society driven by speed and spectacle, hesitation is fatal. Machiavelli understood this. He wasn't endorsing cruelty, he was exposing the rules of the game. He showed us that the world rewards perception, not substance. The prince who appears virtuous will gain loyalty, even if he's secretly ruthless. The leader who projects certainty will be followed, even if he's wrong. Meanwhile, the genius who questions everything, who struggles with doubt, who refuses to deceive gets left behind. Their brilliance becomes their burden. But this isn't a call to despair. It's a call to awareness. Because once you see the system for what it is, you're no longer its prisoner. You start to play consciously. You stop expecting fairness. You stop waiting for recognition. You stop assuming that truth alone will win. And that's the moment you begin to reclaim your power, not by abandoning your mind, but by understanding how to apply it in a world that doesn't care how smart you are unless you make them. Let's go deeper. Think about school. Who gets rewarded? Often, it's not the most insightful student. It's the one who follows instructions best. The obedient genius does well on tests, scores high, gets praised. But they're still playing someone else's game. They're not creating. They're not challenging. They're not leading. They're performing. And over time, that performance becomes a prison. Genius becomes domesticated. Now fast forward to adulthood. The same pattern repeats. Workplaces don't promote the most brilliant ideas, they promote the people who make their bosses feel comfortable. Boardrooms don't reward the most original thinkers, they reward the ones who protect the status quo. In politics, in business, In media, it's rarely the genius who rises. It's the one who knows how to sell simplicity to a distracted crowd. And if that person happens to be an idiot, so be it. As long as they're confident, loud, and useful to someone more powerful, they ascend. Do you feel the weight of that? Have you ever looked around and thought, how can these people be in charge? And then turned that question inward, what am I doing wrong? But you're not doing anything wrong. You're just playing the wrong game. You're bringing a chessboard to a poker match. And Machiavelli would tell you stop expecting the rules to make sense. The game isn't rigged against you because you're not good enough. It's rigged because you're good in ways the system doesn't value. So what can we do? First, we must stop worshiping intelligence as an automatic path to power. Intelligence is potential, but power requires strategy. It requires timing. It requires understanding the psychology of the crowd. And it often requires doing things that offend your internal sense of fairness. This is where many geniuses fail, not because they're incapable, but because they're unwilling. They want to win without getting their hands dirty. But the world doesn't work that way. Machiavelli didn't just write about ruthless princes. He wrote about the psychology of people. He knew that the masses don't want truth, they want stability. They don't want to be led by the most brilliant mind, they want to be led by the person who makes them feel safe, even if that person is a fraud. This is why idiots rise, not because they're smarter, but because they're better at manipulating perception. Now here's a question you must ask yourself, and it will haunt you. Are you obeying because you're wise or because you're afraid? Genius often wears the mask of humility. But sometimes it's just fear in disguise, fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of stepping into a world that doesn't reward nuance. So we retreat, we obey, we become invisible. And in doing so, we betray our own potential. But what if we didn't retreat? What if we studied the game not to become manipulators, but to become conscious actors? What if we learned how to package our insights in ways that the world can receive? What if we stopped waiting for permission and started claiming presence? You don't have to be corrupt. You have to be strategic. You don't have to lie. But you do have to learn how to speak in the language of influence, not just truth. This is where genius must evolve. The future doesn't need more isolated thinkers. It needs courageous communicators, people who can bridge the gap between depth and action, people who can bring their inner clarity into the chaos of the world without being swallowed by it. That's what Machiavelli was really pointing to, not that the world belongs to the wicked, but that the world belongs to those who understand how it works. So ask yourself, are you willing to learn the rules of power, even if they offend your ideals? Are you willing to protect your vision without becoming a servant to your own perfectionism? Are you willing to be hated in the short term to serve something greater in the long term? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary. Because if you don't answer them, the world will answer for you. And you may not like the role it casts you in. Let's not forget Machiavelli was exiled, dismissed, misunderstood. He knew what it meant to be too smart in a stupid system. But he didn't give up. He wrote. He observed. He left behind a map not to become ruthless, but to survive ruthlessness. To thrive in a world that punishes innocence and rewards audacity. And now that map is in front of you. You can keep obeying. You can keep hoping that one day someone will notice your brilliance and reward it. Or you can wake up to the game. Not to abandon your genius, but to use it. To understand that rising doesn't require dumbing yourself down. It requires translating your depth into action, and into presence, into power. Because if you don't, someone else will. And they might be an idiot, but they'll be on the stage while you stay in the shadows. Let's go deeper into the fire, because this isn't just a surface-level frustration. It's a fundamental psychological and philosophical conflict. The world rewards simplicity. It rewards certainty. It rewards charisma, even if it's hollow. Meanwhile, genius is often complex, uncertain, introverted. So what happens when a society is structured to elevate the loudest instead of the wisest? It creates a performance-based civilization where status is mistaken for substance and where thinking too much becomes a liability instead of an asset. Machiavelli saw this hundreds of years ago. He knew that appearances matter more than intentions. He wrote that a prince must appear merciful, faithful, humane, upright, and religious, but be ready to act in the opposite way when necessary. Why? Because people don't see the soul. They see the show. Power is psychological. And the masses, as Machiavelli observed, are not moved by truth, they are moved by fear, hope, and spectacle. Do you understand how terrifying that is? The genius crafts complexity. The idiot crafts illusion. An illusion wins because it's easier to digest. Think about modern media. Who gets the most attention? It's not the quiet genius working in isolation. It's the loud personality making bold, stupid claims with full confidence. Certainty sells. Doubt does not. And genius, by nature, doubts. It questions. It hesitates. It considers 10 angles before speaking. But by the time the genius finishes analyzing, the idiot has already built a brand, sold a product, and gained followers. And here's the brutal part. Most people don't care who's right. They care who looks right. Now ask yourself, have you been trained to obey your intelligence, or have you been trained to obey systems that reward obedience itself? Schools teach us to follow rules, not to question them. Workplaces reward compliance, not creativity. Even families, in many cases, value predictability over originality. So we internalize this. The safer path is to obey, to play small, to think deeply but act passively. And in doing so, we become what Machiavelli feared: geniuses who serve princes instead of becoming them. But genius doesn't have to mean passivity. That's the great misunderstanding. Genius is not incompatible with power. It's just that power requires translation. If you want to lead, you must learn how to frame your depth in a way the world can grasp. That doesn't mean dumbing down. It means strategizing. It means understanding that truth must be delivered in a way that can be received. Otherwise, it dies unheard. Machiavelli was not advocating for stupidity. He was warning that intelligence without strategy is useless. He saw how the most brilliant minds of his time were crushed because they refused to adapt. They clung to purity, to idealism, to abstract principles. And while they debated the ethics of action, less ethical men took action and ruled and rewrote history. Do you see the danger here? Every time you overthink your move, someone with half your insight and triple your audacity is already 5 steps ahead. So what do we do with this knowledge? First, we stop lying to ourselves. Intelligence is not enough. Depth is not enough. And good intentions are not enough. The world is not a fair place that rewards merit automatically. That's a fantasy we've been sold to keep us obedient. The truth is darker and more liberating. Once you accept that perception is often more powerful than reality, you can begin to control perception without abandoning your reality. This is what Machiavellian genius looks like, not manipulation for manipulation's sake, but strategic authenticity. You don't need to become a fraud. You need to become fluent in human nature. And human nature responds to emotion, image, momentum. The genius who understands this stops waiting to be discovered and starts designing their impact. Not by faking who they are, but by packaging who they are in a way that bypasses resistance. Let's talk about fear, because fear is what keeps most geniuses small. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being wrong, fear of being seen. But Machiavelli reminds us that fear is also a tool. He writes that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. What does that mean for you? It means you must be willing to be controversial, to break the rules, to make people uncomfortable. Not because you enjoy chaos, but because you know that comfort is the enemy of transformation. The idiot thrives in comfort zones. The genius dies in them. So here's a radical idea. What if your discomfort is the sign that you're finally waking up? What if your fear of using your voice, your ideas, your power is actually the call to do exactly that? What if the voices telling you to stay humble, play nice, wait your turn, are not virtues but chains? Chains that keep the world exactly as it is, ruled by the bold, while the brilliant wait in silence. You don't need to become a tyrant, but you do need to become a player. And that means embracing aspects of yourself that society told you to suppress. Your ambition, your anger, your hunger to be seen. These are not flaws, they are fuel. When directed with wisdom, they become your power source. When repressed, they become your poison. Machiavelli's genius was his refusal to sentimentalize power. He didn't worship it, he studied it. And he taught us that power responds to those who understand its mechanics, not to those who wish it were something else. So if you want to rise, you must become an architect of influence. You must master not only your mind, but the minds of others. You must learn what moves people, not just what is true, but what feels true. Geniuses often obsess over correctness, but the world moves on emotion, story, and momentum. You must learn to tell your truth in the language of power. That means learning how to craft a message, build an image, create a presence. It means stepping into the role of leader, even if you don't feel ready. Because here's the secret, no one ever feels ready. The idiot doesn't rise because they're prepared. They rise because they decide to rise. So you must decide, right now. Will you keep obeying a world that rewards obedience? Or will you start designing a world that responds to your voice? This is your turning point. This is the moment you choose whether to keep analyzing while the world burns or to step into the fire, forge your own path, and rise. Not as a fraud, not as an imposter, but as a conscious, powerful, dangerous genius who knows how to make ideas move. And before we continue, ask yourself this question, honestly, what part of your genius are you hiding? Because you're afraid it will make people uncomfortable. What part of your genius are you hiding because you're afraid it will make people uncomfortable? That single question can shatter the illusion you've been living in. Because the truth is, genius is never comfortable. It disrupts. It questions. It challenges. And that's exactly why power structures don't want it to lead. They want it to obey. They want it to stay in the lab, in the books, in the background, quiet, polite, contained. But genius was never meant to be contained. It was meant to be dangerous. Machiavelli understood this danger. He saw how the most brilliant minds of his time were silenced not with violence, but with praise. They were celebrated so long as they stayed in their box. They were rewarded with titles, positions, and rituals of respect. But the moment they spoke truth to power, the moment they tried to lead instead of advise, they were exiled, destroyed, or forgotten. This is a pattern that repeats through history. Socrates was forced to drink poison. Galileo was silenced. Tesla died broke. These men didn't fail because they lacked genius. They failed because they didn't, or wouldn't, play the game of power. And this is the final, brutal truth. The world doesn't fear stupidity. It fears intelligence with backbone. It fears a mind that can think and act. That's why so many geniuses are subtly trained to obey. Not through force, but through fear. Fear of criticism. Fear of isolation. Fear of being labeled arrogant, aggressive, or ungrateful. So we internalize the script: be smart, but not too loud. Be insightful, but don't challenge authority. Be excellent, but stay humble. And this humility turns into self-erasure. But you weren't born to be erased. You were born to transform. And transformation doesn't happen through silence. It happens through fire, through presence, through unapologetic courage. You must stop asking for permission to be powerful, because no one is going to give it to you. Power is not assigned, it is claimed. And the ones who claim it are often the ones who understand that perception creates reality. Look at the people in charge. Not all of them are idiots, but many of them are masters of illusion. They know how to simplify, how to project confidence, how to make the crowd feel seen, even if it's manipulation. They understand something that most geniuses ignore. People don't follow intelligence, they follow emotion. They follow story. They follow strength. And if you want to lead, you must learn to embody those things without betraying your truth. This is what Machiavelli meant when he said a prince must learn how not to be good. It wasn't a call to evil, it was a call to flexibility. To know when to bend, when to charm, when to strike. To stop believing that virtue alone will protect you. Because it won't. What protects you is awareness. Awareness of human nature. Awareness of systems. Awareness of your own shadow. And when you combine that awareness with genius, you become unstoppable. So what does this mean for you right now, in this moment? It means you must begin the internal revolution. You must stop waiting to be discovered. Stop waiting for the world to recognize your worth. That's not how power works. Power doesn't recognize you, it resists you until you force it to. And forcing it doesn't mean becoming a monster. It means becoming undeniable. You do that by mastering communication, by becoming a translator between your mind and the world, by learning how to speak in symbols, in stories, in language that moves hearts, not just minds. Because the crowd doesn't want a lecture. It wants a leader. It wants someone who embodies clarity in the chaos. And that someone could be you if you stop obeying your own fear. Let's get even more real. Have you ever noticed how mediocrity is rewarded as long as it's wrapped in confidence? How many times have you seen someone rise simply because they weren't afraid to be seen, even if they had nothing to say? That's not just frustrating, it's a warning. If you don't step forward, someone else will, and they will shape the narrative. They will define the future. They will lead your peers, your community, your generation. And they might lead it into disaster. So now you face a choice. Stay silent and let the idiots rise. Or rise yourself not as an imitator, but as a new kind of leader. A leader who combines depth with delivery, insight with action, truth with tactics. That's what the world needs now more than ever, genius with a spine. Not just intelligence, but influence. Not just wisdom, but warriorship. Machiavelli would say, if you cannot be both loved and feared, choose to be feared. But I say, be both. Be the kind of genius who is feared because you're unshakable, and loved because you speak what others only feel. Be the kind of presence that makes people question their assumptions, rethink their values, remember their own power. That's not arrogance. That's leadership. And it's your responsibility. Because if not you, who else will teach the world how to think without being crushed? Who else will show that complexity is not weakness, that nuance is not confusion, that intellect is not passivity? Who else will rewrite the rules not with rebellion, but with precision? The clock is ticking. Every day you hesitate, the world moves forward without your input. Every day you obey the system gets stronger. Every time you silence a thought because it's too radical, too uncomfortable, too honest, you give away a piece of your own revolution. And the revolution doesn't begin outside. It begins in the mirror, with a decision. A decision to stop being the genius who obeys and start being the genius who leads. Not because you crave power, but because you understand what happens when power is left in the wrong hands. So here's your final challenge. Not a call to arms, but a call to impact. Take your ideas and bring them into the world. Speak them, write them, build them, shape them, and do it with the fierce clarity that only a conscious mind can hold. Don't wait for applause. Don't wait for validation. Don't wait for the world to get smarter. Show the world what intelligence looks like when it stops apologizing. Because the truth is, idiots rise only when geniuses stay seated. So stand up, speak out, and rise not in spite of your genius, but because of it.